My specialty, what I know about some, is international migration. Really quite different than the two cases that have been discussed here. Although there's some, I would draw parallels from my remarks to Katrina more than Fukushima. But three simple points that I think are relevant from thinking about disaster migration in the international context. One. Disaster migration rarely happens in isolation. It often is explainable with other contexts, both economic and also basic public safety. One of the easy examples, for example, the post-Hurricane Mitch migration from Honduras. People left Honduras because the hurricane produced a great deal of devastation of infrastructure, but there had been an ongoing migration before and a migration that happened after due to a whole variety of reasons. Family reunification, economic migration, and fleeing from conditions other than those created by the disaster. Breakdowns of state authority, public safety dangers, a breakdown of markets, a whole variety of other circumstances that were exacerbated by the disaster that we tend to put the label on those migrants as resulting from that disaster. But in fact, when you look at a lot of these migrations, you look at environmental migration from the Middle East, from sub-Saharan Africa, from Southern Africa. There are a whole bundle of other factors involved at the same time. That's not to say that the environmental issues are small or insignificant. They're quite important, and they can be the stimulus, but they're often the straw that breaks the camel's back as opposed to the prime mover or the initial mover. And these migrations, as I said, there's something there before, there's something there after, and then you've got an episode that's really related to an environmental crisis. The other point I would make is that in these sorts of situations, you don't have a sudden singular event like you did at Fukushima or Katrina. You often have environmental degradation that is continuing over a period of time. Droughts, coffee blights, are other examples, or droughts or floods, but they tend to happen differently than these disasters as cumulative events that produce at some point produce the circumstances that generate migration rather than sort of one day something very dramatic happen. And the third point is that these kinds of migrations, those stimulated by environmental disasters, whether they're sudden or long-term, don't fit readily into our migration policies, not just in the United States, but across the industrialized West. So our humanitarian protection policies are all aimed at people who are suffering state persecution, sometimes non-state actors. The definitions of what constitutes the qualifications for asylum or refugee status have been broadened, but there is typically a specific a human element that's producing the threat, whether it's a non-state actor, a criminal circumstance, or a state persecution. It's originating with a human being. We don't have very good policies. In fact, in the United States, we don't really have any that view people as victims of an environmental circumstance and then derive some form of protection. The one exception to that is temporary protected status, which in the United States is an executive decree that a group of people from a given nation are allowed to remain in the United States for a period of time due to any number of circumstances. One of them can be an environmental disaster. And so, for example, the aforementioned Hondurans from Hurricane Mitch. Hurricane Mitch was in 1998. They're still here 20 years later. The temporary protected status has been extended and extended and extended. It's not a very good policy mechanism, but it's basically the only one we have that takes into account these kind of circumstances. And these circumstances, the other factors, the fact that the environmental disaster or prompt doesn't come suddenly, they're relevant not just for people leaving, but also in the question of resettlement and return. When you've got a mixed motive migration, which is what we call it in the trade, where you've got environmental circumstances, economic, public safety circumstances all bundled together in a massive motives for leaving, those you can resolve one of them, say the environmental factor. You can rebuild infrastructure after a storm that doesn't relieve the other reasons for leaving. Those motivations remain. And so in dealing with resettlement, when it's specifically pegged to a single environmental cause, you often found, as we've seen in the Katrina cases here, people are still reluctant to leave. I mean, New Orleans is an interesting parallel because public safety was a disaster there. Public education was a disaster there. For whole segments of the population, they've been cut off of any sort of positive economic activity. Those things all bundle together with a single, very specific catastrophe to prompt people to leave, and also became factors in decisions about when to return or not. As I said, all these circumstances become much more complicated in the international context where you've got a juridical proceeding at some point that determines where people are going to live. A host nation has to either give temporary status, permanent status, be involved in some sort of resettlement activity or not, and those policy mechanisms have yet to really be adapted to the circumstances we see now being repeated over and over again around the world, where environmental circumstances are one of the important motives for migration.
So Ryan Alaniz is a faculty member at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and has extensive experience working with NGOs in the disaster migration area, especially in Central America, as I recall.
Yeah, so thank you, Adam, for the invitation. My name is Ryan Alaniz. I'm an associate professor of sociology at Cal Poly State University, San Luis Obispo, which is about three and a half hours north of here if there's no traffic. This morning it was 5. So my research is focused mostly on how resettlement of people from different locations, so different neighborhoods, come together in what I call a heterogeneous population into different resettlements. And I appreciate Roberto mentioning Honduras, because that's where I did my research. I looked at 7 resettlements in post-Hurricane Mitch Honduras. So 1998, Hurricane Mitch happened, and I was there 2009 and 2010. And I looked at these 7 resettlements and where people came from the same affected neighborhoods in the capital city, Tegucigalpa, but then had chosen and were chosen to go to these 7 different resettlements. So I'll start with a story. Almost all of these resettlements were very similar, but 2 in particular were very similar. They were located only 5 kilometers away from one another. They had similar house sizes, similar land sizes, similar livelihood opportunities, and again, demographically, in terms of religion, in terms of socioeconomic status, in terms of family size, they were very similar. And yet, over time, one of these resettlements, Pino Alto, ended up with high levels of gang violence, drug and alcohol abuse. They had 28 murders in the 8 years that they had been in existence. There was no functioning political system. And 3 miles or 5 kilometers away, this other resettlement had high civic participation, a very strong political structure. People liked living there. They had high trust with one another, and people worked together for the betterment of the community. So the question is, how does a resettlement become a community? And so that's what my book is about, From Strangers to Neighbors. And so I'd like to share 4 lessons that I learned from these 7 different resettlements. First and foremost, as Jonathan had mentioned in terms of traumas, but also as Lori had mentioned, these vulnerable populations need support. So when people often, this idea of Katrina fatigue, if if the organization or the government builds infrastructure, that's not enough to make a successful community. That's enough to make a successful resettlement, but it's not going to create a community. Because we have to take into account power relationships and inequalities within that resettlement. Second, what is the best strategy to build community within a resettlement? So in some cases, people talk about the bottom-up, supporting residents and empowering residents to take advantage of opportunities and give them the power to make decisions. And others talk about top-down or technocratic, where organizations and government decide and tell the people how to do things. And I argue it's somewhere in between. Because one, individuals may not necessarily have, or families may not necessarily have the capacity and or the skill to run a brand new resettlement, the political, the economic, the social issues that come up. And second, these technocratic organizations or governments don't want to stick around for 10, 20 years running this organization or this new resettlement. So there needs to be a balance between the two. The third point is, let's look at how do we define, as Lori had mentioned, or ask, how do we measure better off? Well, I tried to do that, and I call it social health. So often we talk about infrastructure as being successful. How many houses have been built? Well, what I argue too is that we should think about the social health of these resettlements. So I talk about, is there trust? Do neighbors trust each other? Do people participate in community affairs? Do they vote? Do they work on community projects together? Is there collective efficacy, meaning do people look out for one another? Will they help each other if there's a need? Is there a common vision? So are people willing to see the goal, whether it's in 5 years or 10 years, and work towards a better community? And finally, and this is specifically in Honduras, which has one of the highest homicide rates in the world, low crime is necessary for people to feel safe. The fourth point is initial culture matters. So in terms of resettlement, it's very important, drawing on the theory of dependence or dependence theory, it's very important how things start for how things will end up. So in the case of dependence theory, if we think about a snowball on the top of a perfectly round hill, that snowball can go in any different direction, but once it starts to gain momentum and becomes bigger and bigger and becomes very difficult to move in a different direction. I argue the same thing is true with community or resettlement culture. If you start a community down a resettlement down a really good road, if people are willing to sanction each other for bad behavior, if people are saying, hey, we should pick up the trash in our community, hey, we don't want gangs to be part of our community, hey, the young men were graffitiing on the wall, we're gonna punish them, then that's going to create a certain type of community. But if that doesn't happen, if people are like, oh, I don't care, or yeah, we just throw our trash in the river, then that starts a culture. And as people come in, it starts to continue and grow. So thinking about how to start resettlement culture in a very healthy way and ensure that continues over time. So I'll just go through those really quickly. Survivors are vulnerable and they need support and guidance. We need to think about a strategy in terms of building resettlements and community development, both in terms of top-down and bottom-up. And social health is an important measure or metric to think about in terms of resettlement. And finally, we must, if we are to do resettlement well, we have to think about culture, especially initial culture. Thank you.
The next speaker will be Mr. Yukiei Matsumoto, who is the mayor of Naraha town in Fukushima. So Naraha town is one of the 12 municipalities which were forced to migrate after the nuclear power plant accident. And he was the first mayor who enabled their citizens to repatriate their original home. So I was a member of the recovery committee since its establishment right after 6 months after the nuclear power plant accident. And I was a person who encouraged them to recover their community and their town. So I'm very happy. So I asked him to come here and share his experience to all the audience, and he agreed to with that. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity. So please come, the Mayor Matsumoto.
ご紹介をいただきました福島県楢葉町長の松本幸恵であります。
I am Mr. Yukiei Matsumoto, a town mayor for Naraha town of Fukushima Prefecture.
私からは原発事故によります全町民避難、そしてまた楢葉への帰還、さらには復興への課題等を話をさせていただきます。
So I am going to talk about after the Fukushima Daiichi reactors disaster, the entire town was evacuated, and also they were trying to return to their hometown, and how we can, what kind of policies we can provide for the reconstruction. So I'm going to touch upon very briefly all those kind of topics.
私自身英語も話せませんし、こういったプレゼンテーションが慣れておりませんので、どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
I don't speak English, as you can see, and also I am not used to making presentation in front of a lot of people, and so please, just be patient with me.
まず震災前の楢葉をご紹介をいたします。
I would like to show you this is a Naraha town before the disaster.
東京から約200キロ離れておりまして、沿岸に面しておりまして、気候はですね、年に2回程度雪が降るというような大変住みやすい町であります。
So the Naraha city, Naraha town, is that it's about maybe 200 kilometers away from Tokyo. Divided by 1.6 comes to the miles. So, and then this is a coastal area, so the weather is very mild and very comfortable to live, and maybe just one or twice snow per season. That's all.
それで、福島第一から20キロのところに位置しております。
And this is located about 20 kilometers from the first reactor, nuclear power plant.
2011年の3月11日に発生しました原発事故を受けましてですね、このいわき市と会津の方に2つに分かれて避難をいたしました。
So after the disaster of the March 11, 2011, the town, the people were divided into the two different cities, Waki city as well as Aizu.
それで、4月21日にはですね、福島第一から20キロ圏内が警戒区域に設定されまして、出入りが規制されました。
And then April 21st, about 20 kilometers radius away from the first Fukushima reactor, that area was prohibited to enter. So restricted area.
で早期のですね帰還を目指すことを政治公約といたしまして震災の翌年に町長選挙で当選をさせていただきました。
At the time that I ran for the mayor, I promised to the people that the earliest possible return to the town, I am going to work hard for that. So that was my promise to the people, and I was elected to be a mayor.
避難生活はですね、本当にさまざまな問題がございましたけども、私が町長に就任してから、年に2回、 そしてまた1回あたり約30回ほど町主催による懇談会を開催いたしまして、町民から苦情やらいろんな話を聞かせていただいて問題解決に当たりました。
So, you know, the people's life, you know, after the evacuation were very, very struggling, very difficult. And so, you know, I decided to have the town's meeting maybe twice a year. And we had maybe 30 different times for one session. And then we have a communication among us. And so I listened to the complaints from the townspeople, and I try to resolve as much as I can.
そして関係者の努力もございまして2015年9月の5日に震災から約4年半経ちましたが避難指示が解除されまして住民の帰還が始まりました。
And then September 5th, 2015, it was about 4 years and a half later of this you know, disaster and evacuation, the evacuation order was lifted and the people start moving back.
ただですね、一気に町民の帰町が進んだわけではありません。ご覧の通りですね、解除から3年目を迎えたこの9月でですね、町内に住む者が3510名、ようやく5割に達したところであります。
So the population after 3 years from the lifting of this forced evacuation, about 50% of the population, which is 3,510, returned.
ただここには書いておりませんけれども、帰還者の戻られた年代層を見ますとですね、特にですね子どもたちの帰還率が低くて2割にとどまっております。
In terms of the demography, the age, when you look at the age, the children do not return. In other words, 20%, only 20% of the children return to the hometown.
帰還政策で生じたさまざまな課題について触れたいと思います。
I would like to just talk about the some kind of issues related to the returning policies.
原子力災害特有の問題である除染の状況であります。
One of the things is a decontamination efforts after the disaster.
これは国がですね除染事業を進める除染特別地域に指定されました。この写真がその様子であります。
So this picture shows that the you know the government specified the area that contamination, decontamination special you know area.
で除染のピーク時におきましてはですね、3000人に及ぶ除染作業員で進めておりました。
And then, you know, the decontamination efforts has been progressing, and at the time of the peak, about 3,000 workers worked for the decontamination efforts.
2012年9月から約2か年にわたって除染をされました。
And then they worked for about 2 months from the September 2012.
先ほどから話が出ておりますけども、2か年にわたって楢葉町だけで3000人の、毎日3000人の除染事業者がおりましたから莫大な費用がかかっております。
So when you look at the Naraha, where I represent, there is about 3,000 decontamination workers were working very hard every day, which means that it costs a lot of money for the government as well.
ただこの除染もですね問題がありまして、住んでいる居住地から20メーターというような制限が国でされました。それ以外のものについてはなかなか除染が進んでいないという状況であります。
So this decontamination effort has an issue as well, because the area which is going to be decontaminated is ordered by the government, which is only 20 meters around that area. Other areas away from the 20 meters, they're not part of this decontamination area.
これはですね、除染で出た廃棄物の仮置き場の様子であります。
This shows the temporary storage for the wastes after the efforts of the decontamination.
不燃物が37万袋、可燃物が20万袋、合計で58万袋ほど、ここだけではありませんけれども、町内に24カ所の仮置き場を設置しまして、置いてあります。
And so this kind of contamination, storage, temporary storage areas, we had about 24 different locations, and then 370 bags and 200,000 bags, and in total is more like 580,000 bags.
国においてはですね、この廃棄物を3年で中間貯蔵へ持っていくというような約束を交わしましたが、まだ相当残っております。従いまして、住民の帰還にもかなり影響が出ております。
Well, the government promised that within 3 years we are going to reduce this waste, to half. However, there are still many remains there, and which really cause a lot of problems for the people who live there.
次にですね、飲み水の問題があります。このダムの底にですね、放射線量の高い泥が沈んであります。
And regarding the decontamination efforts, there was an issue about the tap water. The bottom of the dam, there was a radiation amount, very high radiation amount. Mud is at the bottom.
それで、多くの町民から不安の声が寄せられました。
And because of that, people had a lot of anxieties.
このなんて言いますか、組織のですね、長を私務めておりますので、3つのことを進めました。
Well, as a representative of this organization, or maybe the committee, that I decided to implement maybe 3 different things.
一つは、国の、飲料水の国の基準はですね、10ベクレルなんですが、それを1ベクレルまで下げました。
Well, first, the tap water, the government, the national criteria is 10 civil, but I decided to move down to 1 civil, which is almost no contamination.
それと、出てありますけれども、1時間ごとにこの水の調査をする機会を同時にしました。
And also, I ordered to install the device or the equipment to test the quality of water every hour.
それでも不安を持つ人には、家庭から出る家庭の蛇口から出る水を、企業に持ってきていただいて、調査をしたということです。
And even so, some people have anxieties and they are worried, about the contamination. And so we brought that water and then we tested ourselves as again.
それでもまだ不安は残りますが、実は、今月の上旬にですね、この水をペットボトルに詰めて、販売をするということを今進めております。
Well, still, some people are very, very worried about the contamination, and therefore I decided to fill the water, tap water, into the PET bottle and sell it. And we just started, and it is, in progress.
当然検査はしております。
of course, we tested before filling in.
次にですね、中間貯蔵施設の建設問題について、話をさせていただきます。
Okay, so let's move on to the interim storage facility construction.
当初、建設の候補地が、大熊町、双葉町、そして楢葉町が入ってたんです。
Well, first, there are three different, towns, including our town, as the possible site for the interim storage facilities.
で、帰れる比較的線量が低くて帰れる町なのになんで、建設をするんだということで、町民からすごい反発がありました。
Well, the townspeople are very, very much against for that construction of the facility.
ただ国においては一方的にボーリング調査等をして、進めたものですからこれ断るのは大変だなというふうに思いました。
Well, however, the national government decided to dig in and using the bowling, and they started conducting the research to identify where the possible location or site. And so it was very difficult, for me to stop their, initiative.
それで国と県、双葉町、大熊町等々とですね、いろいろと交渉を重ねて最終的には政治的な交渉の中で、楢葉町が、3カ所なのを2カ所になりました。
So after the hard work of the political negotiation with towns and prefectures and government officials and all of those, that I was able to restrict the number of the site in my town, Naraha, only 2.
ご覧の通りですね、先ほど申し上げました通り、除染をしたためにですね、72% ほど低減をしまして、そして基調へと進むことになりました。
And then after the contamination work, we were able to move to returning to the hometown.
ただ基調を進める上で先ほど長松先生もおっしゃっておりましたが、いろいろとジレンマもありました。というのは、東京電力から出ます損害賠償が支払われることになっておりまして、避難指示が解除される時期に応じて支払われるという制度設計になっております。
So, but still we had a dilemma, because Tokyo Electric Company, decided to pay or was told to pay the compensation, for the damages. And so, lifting this forced evacuation and also the, amount of money that they could have received, from this Tokyo Electric Company. And so there was a kind of dilemma, as someone mentioned, economic and also the
従いまして、基調イコール、損害賠償が打ち切られるということで、基調のブレーキをかけたことは事実であります。
So, because the Tokyo Electric Company in these compensations for the damages is going to end if the area, forced evacuation was lifted.
最後になりますが、原子力災害による全町避難からの再生はですね、前例がありませんので、その時々で大変な苦労をし、そしてまた悩みました。ただ被災を受けた自治体は楢葉だけではなくて、いまだ避難を余儀なくされている自治体もあります。
Well, because this type of disaster, we did not have any precedence. And therefore, we have to just try our best in order to cope with and respond to. And therefore, we had a lot of difficulty, challenges, and I wasn't able to sleep, at night, and I had tried to decide. But this one is not only restricted to our own Naraha town, but there is other municipalities also have to go through this kind of a dilemma and challenges as well.
したがって後に続く自治体のためにも復興のトップランナーとして被災地を牽引をしていくというような考えでおります。
Well, I am determined to become a leader of reconstructing the municipalities because this is a very, very important task, for the disaster hit areas.
以上でですね、復興の政策課題についてお話をさせていただきましたが、下手なプレゼンテーションで大変失礼いたしました。日本に来る機会がありましたら、どうぞ、福島県楢葉にお寄りください。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
Well, thank you very much. This would conclude my presentation. I hope I did not bore you. And if you have a chance to come to Japan, please feel free to drop by my office. And it's a Naraha town, so remember that.
So the first question is, how do we build knowledge bridges between scholars and practitioners locally and globally so we can learn from previous mistakes? So Ryan, do you want to start with that?
Sure, that was my question. And I think it's difficult. I think it's especially difficult when there may be a language barrier. But I think opportunities like this Symposium or other knowledge action networks is a real opportunity for us to share ideas and experiences and lessons learned. One of the reasons I asked this question was because when I asked every one of the nonprofit executive directors that was working on these different resettlements, I said, so what strategy, what recovery strategy, what community development strategy were you drawing upon to help this resettlement develop into a community? Each one of them said, I don't know what you're talking about. We're just winging it. We're doing the best that we can with what we know. And had there been some umbrella organization or some support from academics or technocrats, I think they would have had much better outcomes than what they had, what many of them had.
You wonder whether that kind of interchange about internal displacement can actually carry over and reduce some of the very profound and angry tensions we see about international resettlement. I mean, whether there's, if you can build a framework of knowledge and practices and understanding around internal migration, is it possible to reduce some of the tensions around international crisis migration?
It's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know. It's worth a shot.
Ask the mayor if he has some comments on this question. How do we connect researchers and practitioners, public officials such as yourself, NGOs? How do we connect them more closely in a disaster situation?
一言では難しいと思うんですけども、なんて言いますかね、まず政治主導でですね、枠組みをきちっと作ることが一番最初の、進め方なのかなというふうに思っております。
I think, the first step is the political leaders must take initiatives, and they have to create some kind of a solution framework. Make sense?
Well, let me just chime in and give a plug to Lori's center, Natural Hazards Center at the University of Colorado. Of all of the hundreds of conferences I've been at in my career, it probably has the best balance of researchers and practitioners of any of them. So it's held every July in Boulder, Colorado, and look it up on the website. Natural Hazards Center at the University of Colorado. Let's go to another question, and this was suggested by Roberto, and it requires a little bit of background which he provided, but essentially Roberto's point is these disasters don't happen in isolation. There's a context, people have a certain standard of living, certain power relationships to begin with, and do we take all that into account, or do we just work on the increment with respect to the disaster itself? So to what extent should the criteria for judging individual eligibility for long-term resettlement take into account underlying circumstances beyond the immediate disaster? Did I do justice to that?
Yeah.
And I'll let you
start.
I mean,
so if you think of the a particular kind of migrant who is whose movement has been spurred by a disaster, whether it's a slow-moving disaster or a sudden one, but comes against the context, and let's just narrow it to a state failure, to a condition where public safety, for example, the state's responsibility to provide for public safety has failed, which is an example in Central America. You combine drought and rampant criminality, you get the motives for migration. How do you balance those two considerations in judging somebody either for resettlement or for repatriation? I mean, in the cases that we're talking about today, I mean, interestingly, certainly in Katrina, there was a broad feeling of state failure around that event. And does the value of the migrant or the migrant's worthiness for protection increase or decrease when there's an element of state failure in the cause of the migration? And in resettlement, do you need to take into account whether or not the state has remedied its failure? So decontamination was a perfect example. In Fukushima, there was also some sense of state failure by some critics. I'm not an expert at all on that event, but there were certainly in news reports there was some critique. So at what point do you have to remedy that part of it that underlies the migration? As I said, either in judging worthiness or in making plans for return. That's a very contentious question at this point. I mean, and it's political, obviously. So I don't have an answer, other than I think it's something you need to, something I threw out for discussion here.
So the Japanese case, the government stepped up. As I understand, in Chernobyl, they pretty much just told people to leave and just wrote the whole area off, and that was it, even though some people have returned. But the government just abandoned any responsibility. I'm not sure what happened in 3 Mile Island. Fortunately, that's probably the worst case that we've had. Yeah, no evacuation, no sickness. So we don't have that experience for comparability. But let's ask the mayor for comments on this question. Well, without putting him on the spot, do you think the Japanese government should do more to help the people of your town and other towns?
原発事故当時はですね、現在の政権自民党ではなくて、民主党政権だったんです。
Well, at the time that this disaster took place, the leading party was not Liberal Democratic Party. That was the second largest one became the first one, which was not the Liberal Democratic Party, but the Democratic Liberal Party, I think.
それで警戒区域の決め方であるとか。
So the way they decided where is really the restricted zone or no entry zone.
除染の仕方であるとか、さまざまな問題がありました。
Or maybe decontamination, the way how you are going to do the decontamination. There are, many debates on that.
誤解も相当ありましたけども、今の自民党政権に変わってからはですね、今言い方はどうあれですね、順調に進んでいるものというふうに思っております。
So the political party now changed, like Democratic and Republicans things. They have a different ways. So the Japan's Liberal Democratic Party now took over the majority, and so now they were in power. So there were many misunderstandings before, but after the party took over, I think the situation is moving better and maybe moving forward, I would say.
その時の政権にもよりますけども、いずれにいたしましても政治主導で進めなければしっかりとは進まないということだと思います。
So I think depends upon which party is controlling, because that really determines the direction of the country. But so either way, I think the political leadership is really a key in order to move things forward.
Right. So in some weather disasters are inherently a political event.
With respect to presidential disaster declarations?
No, but I mean just the way we described. Who gets what aid, who gets what protection, where people are sent, what community is considered worthy of investment. We think of these things as climatological, but they are inherently political.
So I think people have done studies to show that states who voted for the president in office are more likely to get a presidential disaster declaration than states who haven't. And personally, I think that's a sad statement of affairs, but it's just my viewpoint. So anyway, let's go on to a next, do you want to?
Sure, just very briefly. I think, Roberto, it's an excellent question about mixed motive migration, right? Do you address when you're talking about Honduras, and it's a rabbit hole in terms of the failure of Honduras. So when Hurricane Mitch hit in October of 1998, the Honduran government had zero lempiras, $0 to address relief, let alone recovery. So when we look at the history of Honduras, we could trace it back to the open veins of Latin America and U.S. exploitation. So we could go all the way there if we wanted to. But the Honduras government had no opportunity to address these big issues. So they can't necessarily address these root causes. So it was organizations that addressed the proximate cause. Like, well, let's just get these people out of temporary shelters and get them to a place that's actually safe. So who's responsible? The UN is currently dealing with this in terms of its issue with loss and damage. I'm working with the United Nations University. And climate change, when people are having to be relocated from Vanuatu or Kiribati or these other islands, Bangladesh, and move somewhere else, who's going to pay for that? And it's not their fault because they're not the ones who polluted. And so who's responsible to help these folks not die where they are and have a good life moving forward?